Hello and welcome to the Oregonian Sports podcast. I am one of the members of this cast, Bill Oram, joined by the other, Brenna Greene. Brenna, this is the day you've been waiting for.
Oh, it is.
Because today is the day that we can actually talk about your alma mater, Gonzaga University, and it is relevant to the conversation.
Okay. Okay.
The Zags,
as you can tell, I'm excited. Let's do this.
the Zags are coming down to play Oregon State on Thursday. WCC matchup. Two of the better teams in the WCC. The best team in the WCC, and then one of the other better teams in the WCC in the Beavers. We can touch on that obviously later. This game is obviously a bigger deal for Oregon State than it is for Gonzaga, simply because hey, the Beavs are going to pack that place. They're going to have Gil full. Which is always fun when it is. I mean, people talk about the advantage that Gil Coliseum is when it's full. Beavers and Zags haven't played in 34 years. Beavers own the all-time series, something like 25-2.
It's crazy,
but only because. And I was looking at this earlier, and I'm writing something about it today, so it'll be up by the time people listen to this podcast. But
yeah,
you know, since they last played on January 7th, 1991, the Zags have won 905 games. They've gone to 27 NCAA tournaments, including the last 26. They've had 12 first-round draft picks in the NBA. The last 9 Sweet 16s, going for their 10th this year. And the Beavers, it hasn't all been bad, right? It really hasn't been all bad.
No,
like most programs in the country, has not been able to achieve that level of consistency or success because very few programs have. But it's interesting. It's an interesting moment for reflection, I guess, on Oregon State basketball and this new era we're in. I find it kind of humorous that in the last year plus, Oregon State joined the WCC and Gonzaga joined the Pac-12.
Yes,
but they're still. But what I will say is that Thursday is the beginning of regular matchups between the Beavers and the Zags. The Zags are going to play at Gil now every year going forward because it's going to be a conference matchup going forward. I think that's cool. I think it's significant to the Beavers. I did talk to Wayne Tinkle about it a little bit, and one thing he said that I thought was telling about the way they view this is that having Gonzaga as a conference opponent is potentially going to help make up for the loss of some of those rivals and that history and the some of those top tier matchups that you got in the Pac-12. So obviously, like I said, probably a bigger deal for the Beavers than it is for the Zags at this point, but I still think it's cool.
Wayne Tinkle, Spokane high school graduate. So
there's so much great history between Wayne Tinkle and the Zags too. I assume you know all of this.
Yes, I do.
But
probably. I mean, maybe not.
But Wayne Tinkle's dad was the dean of students at Gonzaga in the 70s. Wayne was recruited out of Ferris High School by Gonzaga. He grew up, in the shadow of John Stockton. John was exactly 4 years older than Wayne. So when John was a senior at Gonzaga, Wayne was a senior at Ferris. Wayne would play in the open gyms that John would organize, and would hang out with John Stockton. So what a great mentor to have when you were a high school player preparing for the next step in your own career, which for him was making the very good choice to go play at the University of Montana. But see, we can all work our alma mater into the conversation.
Yes, we can. We've done it. We've hit the
bingo
Brenna
card.
And Bill double.
Also, why is this podcast not called Air B and B? Would we get sued for that?
Probably.
Okay.
I don't know.
So,
we could just call it B and B.
Yeah, but I like the Airbnb because we're broadcasting. It's not in a traditional sense, but it could be Pod B and B.
Pod B and B. That's not bad. I wouldn't be upset with that.
It's something. Anyway, Zags and Corvallis, kind of a cool, unique thing that won't be terribly unique going forward, but first time in certainly a lot of people's lifetimes.
Yes. I was not alive the last time they played.
You want to know a funny quote from a funny thing about the last time Oregon State and Gonzaga played basketball, by the way?
Please, and then I'm going to share a funny anecdote after that.
Okay, I was looking back at it, and Kenny Wheeler, the great Oregonian sports writer for a long, long time, had covered that game, and I just want to find it now. Do I still have it up, or do I need to pull it. Aha. So the quote, the part of the quote that I thought was hilarious was that Jimmy Anderson, who was the coach of Oregon State at the time, passed away last year at 86, but obviously was the last coach to take the Beavers to the NCAA tournament before Wayne, Coach Gary Payton. He said of Gonzaga, they are a good team. Our players just didn't realize it. It's just hilarious to think that Gonzaga basketball could sneak up on anybody. And it tells you what a different time we are talking about there versus now, where Gonzaga hasn't snuck up on anybody in 25 years. So I thought that was humorous, but obviously also spoke to the time we were talking about when these teams last met. Go with your funny anecdote.
I was just going to say that my station in Spokane was literally right next to the high school that Wayne Tinkle went to, Ferris. So during the tournament, the NCAA tournament season, when, the bubble season, I went over there and pulled all of his old yearbooks and got like pictures of him from the yearbooks for a story I was doing. I think it was just about like Spokane connections in the NCAA tournament or whatever. So I can relay to you that Wayne Tinkle said he wanted to be Hugh Hefner when he grew up. So
he's got the hair is kind of worked. I mean, he's got like the shock white, hair.
Yeah.
It's like we just need to work on his wardrobe a little bit, and start there. I guess
maybe not put in the other things in there.
I thought you were going to say that he was like voted most likely to succeed, most likely to play professional sports. Hugh Hefner. I was also in my yearbook as Hugh Hefner, by the way, but only on, I think we'd have to pull this like a high school yearbooks, but I'm pretty sure that on one of the days of Spirit Week I wore a bathrobe and had a pipe and was Hugh Hefner.
Okay.
I don't remember which day it was, but it most certainly wasn't like Hero Day or anything like that. It wouldn't have been that one.
Yeah. Well, anyways, that was a hilarious discovery that that Wayne Tinkle said he wanted to grow up to be Hugh Hefner. So, things have changed, but there was some great stuff in there. Anyway, so yeah, journalism. There you go.
So before we started recording this podcast, we were talking kind of through some of these topics today, and there is suddenly quite a bit going on, like for what's kind of a dead time of year, or mostly only a college basketball time of year. Suddenly, kind of a lot going on, and I think obviously I do want to talk about Oregon State and what's happening down there with the football program. But you asked a good question, and I'd like to throw this back to you.
Yeah.
Monday's the national championship game. And I would think that Oregon fans have maybe disconnected from college football a little bit, to a certain degree after the Rose Bowl shellacking. Maybe. But like from like this current season, right?
Yes.
So you get Ohio State and Notre Dame in the national championship game in Atlanta. Obviously, a lot of Oregon fans thought that their team would be at that game. A lot of Oregon fans had tickets to that game. Maybe they're still going. I don't know. Maybe there's Oregon fans still going. If you're an Oregon fan who bought tickets and is still going to the national championship game, email me. But
yeah, seriously.
But who should Oregon fans, or who do you think Oregon fans will be rooting for in this game? Do they want to see the team that beat them knocked out and get revenge? Or do they want to be able to say they're beaten by the best? If you're a Duck fan, are you rooting for Oregon State, Ohio State, or Notre Dame on Monday? Brenna, put on your Oregon fan hat, your best Oregon cosplay, and tell me.
So I think that my thoughts have kind of changed even since I posed this question to you, because I did a little rudimentary research here. And one of the big talking points after that Notre Dame game is that, oh my gosh, they're going to pocket $20 million to themselves. So I was like, how much money do you make if you win the national championship? And I might be wrong, but in my, 5 minutes worth of research, it seems like it's just you get money if you get to that game. You don't get extra money if you win it. I need to like double check it because that doesn't sound right.
But
Right?
you're saying your revenue share is for each game played. So
Yes.
there's an additional revenue share piece for reaching the playoff, reaching the
Yeah, you got
quarterfinal,
like
reaching the
6 million
semifinal,
if you
reaching the.
made the national championship.
Okay.
But there's no extra in my research, it didn't seem like there was any extra prize for
Okay.
actually winning said game.
Okay.
Which that changes my thought process a little bit. Because if I'm an org,
So just to be clear,
yeah,
if there was $100 million prize to the Big Ten, if a
yeah,
Big Ten team wins the championship, Oregon would be entitled to its one 1/16th share of the $100 million, right?
yes,
The
correct,
made up $100 million.
correct.
But if there's no additional prize, and if you're Oregon, you get no pocket lining,
Yes.
then your thought changes. Okay, now continue. Sorry, I just wanted to talk.
Yeah, I mean, you gotta think about the money first and foremost, and also I think it's something that is even more consequential than actually the money that Ohio State would bring into the conference, because you talk about how it's going to get divvied up and it's going to end up not being that big of a chunk of change. I mean,
Sure.
it's a large chunk of change to you and I, but probably to athletic departments it isn't. However, Notre Dame having $20 million now, that's substantial. Okay? So I'm actually looking at it from a competitor's point of view, and I'm like, I don't want Notre Dame to make more money because they've already made a ton. All right?
Substantial amount.
Yeah, so I'm actually looking at it more from a competitor's point of view, because as you mentioned, it gets divvied up. It ends up not being like an insane amount. So that changes my mind a little bit, because now that there's not any money at play, I think in my brain, all signs go to Notre Dame if I'm an Oregon fan. And I know that traditionally, I am someone that roots for the team that beat my team, because I want to at least know that I lost to the best. At the very least, look, that was the best team in the sport that year. Okay, cool. I can live with that. Which I do think it still is a very valid argument to make. But for me, I see this. First of all, it's like, it's so fresh to being conference brethren that it feels a little weird still to root for Ohio State as a conference mate. If I'm just looking at it from like an Oregon fan's perspective, it's like, I guess we're in the same conference. Okay. And also, but at the same point in time, I feel like over the last few years, regardless, because of what happened in Columbus a few years ago, I do feel like there's been a little bit of a rivalry seed planted here. And, you ask me, okay, this is a perfect example. Last year, UW is in the national championship game. Last year was an impossible position because I grew up an Oregon fan, right? So I'm like, do I root for the Huskies?
Whoa.
Or do I root for a Michigan team that cheated? Okay. I ended up saying, I guess we'll do Michigan, because I just can't UW. So I'm just thinking about this through an Oregon fan's lens. It doesn't really feel like they're a conference mate, and yet it kind of is starting to feel like they're a rival. So I think I gotta go to Notre Dame. Now, personally, this is also an interesting personal question. Okay? This is actually fascinating. Personally, two things. One, I am Catholic, so I guess we'll go for the Catholic school. All right, cool. Great. The second thing is this. I have a news director who is a Notre Dame grad and a Notre Dame fan. But my general manager is from Ohio and an Ohio State fan. I got to think about these things, right? Very serious stuff. But I think I'm still falling on the side of Notre Dame. So, what say you?
Okay, so for me personally, I'm always drawn to an underdog, and Notre Dame is like, a touchdown and a half underdog in this game. I think it's like 9.
Yes.
But so which it's funny because it's like 3 times the line that Oregon faced against Ohio State. If Oregon fans are picking a side going into this game, I think a lot of games when you don't have a vested interest, you just kind of watch the game and you kind of develop a side as the game unfolds. Like when you go into a game as a bit of a rooting agnostic, you find yourself leaning a certain way as the game unfolds. At least I do. From in the sense that I even care, but like you start watching a game and like you just sort of find yourself being drawn to one of the sides. I think. I think if you're an Oregon fan, there's a lot at play here. There are layers.
Yes.
If Ohio State wins the national championship, you beat the national champions in the regular season. You were better than them in one matchup. Now, obviously, you got smoked in the other one, but you can credibly say that you beat the national champions. You can use that in recruiting. You can use that in bar arguments. There's obviously the flip side of the second matchup. Do not get me wrong. But also, if Ohio State does to Notre Dame what it did to the Ducks, it just further validates the season Oregon had and just points to Ohio State as an unbeatable juggernaut and buzzsaw in this college football season that was awakened by the Michigan loss. So I think that the answer is that Oregon fans are going to be rooting for Ohio State. So, hey, we got pulverized by this team. They might as well go all the way. That said, like, I don't know. I think back to being a kid, like probably like the most formative sports fan experience of my life, I think, was the 2000 conference finals when the Blazers lost in 7 to the Lakers. I didn't watch the 2000 finals and say, I sure hope the Lakers get their championship. At that point, I hated the Lakers.
Yeah.
Like Kobe and Shaq were haunting my dreams. Brian Shaw was the enemy. So the idea of like turning on the finals and being like, go Kobe, go Shaq was not going to happen. And so it probably is a little bit of a personal preference. Like, like Ohio State, no, screw those guys. They knocked us out. Maybe there's fans who don't want to see Chip Kelly get a championship. Maybe there's fans who do want to see Chip get a championship. So I think that there will be a bit of a split among Oregon fans. Yeah. But if it's me, I think that, I think the rivalry with Ohio State that you're talking about, that I agree is taking shape, is not so intense and visceral that Oregon fans can watch that game and say, hey, Jeremiah Smith's the best player in the country, best receiver in the country. Feel good about him getting a championship, and boom. I also think that Oregon fans, despite the showing at the Rose Bowl, probably still feel like maybe they would have beaten any of the other teams in the field. And so if that is something that is giving an Oregon fan comfort, like, hey, the Ducks would have beaten Texas, the Ducks would have beaten Notre Dame, the Ducks would have beaten Georgia, they would have beaten Penn State again. Ohio State bullying Notre Dame the same way they have basically everyone except for Oregon and Eugene and Michigan, goes a long way, I think, to kind of maybe putting at least a little bit more of some sugar on a season that ended with a pretty sour taste.
Yeah, I think for me, like I have extensive experience in this category as a Gonzaga fan because
ding,
we got there.
I said we could talk about Gonzaga because it was relevant. That didn't mean you had carte blanche to talk about Gonzaga and try to make it relevant and connect it to all topics.
Well, I am in this one because, I definitely have adopted the policy of rooting for the team that beat my team, especially after, having to cover it for 4 years and being like, well, if they win, I keep going. If they lose, I get sent home like them. So, I know what it feels like to be like, well, I hope at least they're losing to the team that eventually wins it all, because then I'll feel a little bit better about how everything goes. So normally I am of that mind. It's just this one I have, I think there are some other things maybe at play. But I can totally understand Oregon fans having that mindset because, I mean, 2019? Yeah, 2019, Texas Tech beat Gonzaga. They ended up making the national championship. I was like, okay, like I feel a little bit better, that sort of thing. Now a lot of times it doesn't end up working out that way. And the team that they played loses the next round, and you're like, well, that's great, awesome. You're like, well, what could have happened if we would have won that game? But I don't think that's the situation here, so I can totally understand in Oregon fans' mindset of let's just root for Ohio State because then I feel better about how this season ended. Because I've been there.
Also, if Ohio State wins, it will just further validate the outrage over the seeding and the system that was in place. And I don't know what is gained from belly aching about that anymore. I think it's been pretty clearly established that Oregon, did not get the advantage that you would expect an undefeated conference champion to get. But I mean, you'd look. I mean, that should be just intensify the call to action for the college football playoff format to be altered. So
I'm very interested to see what happens in the coming months about that, and I'm sure that we will be talking about it on this pod because I do not see it remaining the same for the year to come.
Yeah,
I just don't see it happening.
Speaking of things that won't remain the same in the year to come, there was a change on the Oregon State football coaching staff. See, they don't teach segues like this in journalism school. You've either got it or you don't.
Look at you.
I know. It's one of those things that that my mama gave me. Don't give me the side eye. Completely appropriate joke. So Oregon State, the
why is it so funny?
It's not. At Oregon State, it's not okay. So the topic is not funny, by the way, at all.
No.
So Oregon State defensive coordinator Keith Hayward stepped down after one season. Nick Daschel spoke to Keith Hayward. Nick Daschel from the Oregonian Oregon Live spoke to Keith Hayward, who was a former Oregon State player, had coached a lot of places, including at Oregon, and had most recently been with the Las Vegas Raiders, and basically described, the feeling of isolation during this season. He had a parent who passed away early in the season or during fall camp, and then his other parent was hospitalized, was dealing with a lot of family stuff during the season. Hey, burnout is real. So Keith Hayward stepped down from the Oregon State football program. Not a football decision, right? Like, there's no point in sitting here talking about what Oregon State's defense was or wasn't last year.
Yeah.
It just wasn't a football decision. So hopefully, he gets the time and balance that he needs to figure out what's next, because that's something that's very real and very relatable, I think, to all of us. But coming out of that is not a shocking decision, but I think a very interesting one, which is that Trent Bray, Oregon State's former defensive coordinator, now head coach, is going to take over defensive coordinator duties in addition to being the head coach. Not an unprecedented situation, but there are, I believe, if I'm recalling correctly from Nick's coverage of this, only 6 or 7 FBS head coaches who also are a coordinator for their team, and I think all but one of them are offensive coordinators.
I used to cover one of them.
Trent Bray is going into his second season as a head coach. Do you like this move for him and for the Beavers?
I think it's better than the former situation that I covered it in with Mike Leach. Mike Leach was also the offensive coordinator at WSU. And I think in that situation, that was not great because of his personality. Just a person who was very, very stubborn and saw his system one way and would not let anybody do anything else with it. The thing I always point to in that situation is there was an Apple Cup in 2018 where it was UW and WSU, and everyone went to the Rose Bowl or went to the Pac-12 championship, and everybody knew it was going to snow like crazy that day. And that's not great for an air raid offense. And Mike Leach was like, I'm running my same offense no matter what. And it was like, well, you have 2 guys on your team that are 2 all-conference running backs, but okay, cool, man. So they had Max Borghi and James, gosh, what's his last name? I'm totally blanking on his last name. Anyways, James Williams. Everybody called him Booby Williams. Anyway, so and Gardner Minshew was quarterback. So, you know, like I look at that situation and I don't think that was I think that it would have been very beneficial to have another voice in the room who could challenge Mike Leach in terms of his offense and say, hey, I don't think that this is a good decision. I don't think it's going to be a similar situation with Trent Bray. I think Trent Bray is going to be much more open to other people's input just from his personality. Just from what I've gathered in his personality. So I think that it is I think that it makes some sense. It makes some sense, you know. I think he said something along the lines of, you know, I do plan on bringing a defensive coordinator in at some point, but right now I want to like ease this transition a little bit and make it so that there's coaches within my staff who understand this defensive blueprint, because I had to bring in all new coaches when everyone left for Michigan State. That's some reasoning that makes sense to me. I understand it. And I think that he will at some point have some sort of, you know, quote unquote succession plan on staff. So I do believe him when he says this is not something that he wants to do forever, because who in the world would ever want to do that forever? Mike Leach. But anyways, so I don't hate it, but that's because I have seen the flip side of it and what it can be. And I think that the personalities in this situation are a little bit different. What are your thoughts?
Similar. I don't hate it. I don't know if I love it. And it's one of those things where I feel like we could be sitting here a year from now and we could be saying, of course that didn't work out.
Yes.
Of course that was bound to be a disaster. You're talking about a guy who has been a head coach for 12 games, is still learning how to run a program from a 30,000 foot level and to be in charge of everything. And before he has like really mastered that job, he's now going back to his old job, which is a very micro job. He's going to be coaching the inside linebackers and calling the defense. Like it's a very hands-on, on the ground job, as opposed to, you know, being in charge of everything. So I think what's important here is how he backfills. You know, I think he's talked about wanting to, you know, bring in some you know, veteran experience on the staff as a defensive analyst, somebody who can really sort of fill in the gaps when he is focused on the defense, you know, who can sort of help fill in some of the gaps of, you know, thinking like a head coach, not to take head coaching duties away from him, but to just fill in some of the gaps that are inevitably created by him giving the defense so much attention. So I think that what happens next here is really important. You know, I do understand the wisdom of, okay, you've got an opening and you want to hire the best possible person for this job. Well, the best person probably is Trent Bray. He probably is the best defensive coordinator within a, you know, I mean, I would probably say within a several 100-mile radius of Corvallis, because I would include his counterpart in Eugene at this point as well. So the question really becomes, you know, how is his organization? How is his mental organization? And how is his ability to sort of juggle those things on the sideline in a game? And we just don't know the answer to that yet. I see obvious pitfalls with it. But again, it's not unprecedented. You know, Trent is learning how to be a head coach still. I think it's fair to say he's not learning how to be a coach still. I mean, this is something that is in his blood. He grew up around it. He watched his dad. He was on the sidelines with, you know, whoever, the whole host of great coaches growing up. So I think that there's some wisdom here. And I think I'm okay giving it a chance to see what happens. I said this going into last year too, or this most recent season, but you know, the schedule lines up really well for the Beavers next year. They should be able to get to bowl eligibility with me calling the defense. You know, you've got teams coming in. You've got a fairly light schedule. It's a non-conference year. You're still kind of hobbling it together. I'm not trying to say next year doesn't matter, because that's not true. It all matters, especially as you're trying to sort of kind of, pick yourself up off the mat if you're Oregon State. But I do think that this year is still a transition year. So I feel like it's an okay year to find out if this is going to work. One of the things that you worry about when a coach has to essentially report to himself is whether he's going to hold himself accountable. And if it's not working, if he will have the wisdom, foresight, strength to say, hey, I'm not the best guy for this job anymore, and I'm going to go get someone else. That's all stuff that remains to be seen. But I would say, Trent Bray as defensive coordinator at Oregon State was almost unimpeachable. His defense was always ready. It was one of the best coached and most creative defenses on the West Coast. So if that's what it's going to be at Oregon State, and he can manage his duties as the head coach, which is his first and foremost his primary job and his primary responsibility,
yes,
then it should work. And I think it's great. But I don't know. So I'd say cautiously I approve. But I will not be surprised but I would not be surprised if we're sitting here a year from now and saying everything I started with, which is, that's too much for a guy who's still learning the ropes of his primary job and the reason he gets paid, $2+ million a year. So I think it's really interesting, though. I think it's a really interesting development. The Beavers did have a lot of problems last year, kind of all around. It's hard to know how much of that is coaching and how much of that was, talent. There were so many moving parts when it came to the roster last year.
Injuries.
And then injuries, particularly on defense.
Yes.
Right? Offensively, I'm actually willing to hang more on the coaching, because the injuries,
yes, I agree with you.
Jam Griffin, significant, but you had other options in the backfield and one offensive lineman. Otherwise, the offense was relatively healthy last year. The defense was hammered by injuries. And that's not on Keith Hayward. So, going to be interesting to see what happens. Obviously, there's a long time between now and the season opener for the Beavers. Long spring. So, I think it's reasonable to take a wait and see approach. And I know that's not our usual. That's not what we like in sports, right? We don't like shades of gray. We want a verdict. And I see how Trent arrived at this decision, and I can see how someone might have been sitting in his office and saying, Trent, I don't think it's a good idea. And one of them's going to be right. We'll find out.
Yeah. Yeah. You make a very good point of somebody learning how to be a head coach and now adding more responsibilities onto their plate. Now those responsibilities have already been mastered at that particular place too, which is good. It's not like this is an unfamiliar setting to once again be putting yourself into that role. But being a head coach is not easy. It's a lot. It's, a lot of being a head coach is delegating. And this is the opposite of delegating.
That's so well said, Brenna. I like that so much, because if being a head coach is about trusting your people, hiring yourself for a direct report job could be seen as showing a lack of trust in other people and being a micromanager. But again, this is not an unprecedented thing. Other coaches have done it. Other coaches have won in this system. So it's, you can argue it all sorts of ways. And I think that the proof is really just going to be in the pudding. Yes. The proof is going to be in the other team punting. Does that work?
Sure. That was a little bit of a stretch, but I enjoyed watching you stretch.
Punting. The proof is in the punting. Punting. Brenna, I have one more topic I'd like to hit before we depart this wonderful podcast time we've spent together.
It's been lovely.
That is ye old Portland Trailblazers. Big time loss against the Brooklyn Nets on Tuesday night. If you are a Tankathon watcher, you understand how important that was, because the Blazers and Nets were tied in the tanking rankings, the trankings, if you will.
You're really on one today.
3 cups of coffee and no solid food yet. So.
Oh well, okay. Now everything makes sense.
In the trankings, we've talked about the need to lose, blah 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 blah. Yeah. Not what I'm interested in today. What I'm interested in today is, one, Sterling Scoot Henderson,
Hmm.
who against the Nets on Tuesday, January 14th, shot 13 of 18 from the field, 8 of 10 from 3, had 6 assists and 2 steals, and scored a career high 39 points. I am pretty much on the Scoot Henderson is I don't want to say bust. I think it's too soon to say bust. But yeah. I think Scoot Henderson is a disappointment. I think the start to his career has been disappointing, and he's kind of the way that he has played and the way that he has performed is the sort of start to a career that does not bode well for him actually panning out as a cornerstone of this franchise. How's that for like a word salad to avoid saying bust? But second year, he's 20 years old. Like, we'll see. What do you take away from a game like that? Like, do you look at him having a career high 39-point performance? The Nets stink. But, it's not like they're helping the ball go in. I mean, he did shoot 8 of 10 from 3. Do you find this as, the arrow suddenly pointing toward, success for Scoot? How much stock do you put in a single performance like this?
I don't know if it's how much stock I put into a single performance like this. I think Scoot has had a really, really good last week, honestly. So that's more what I'm looking at, is that I feel like there's at least some sort of corner-ish being turned here. Am I willing to say that I think that he will not be a B word? No, I'm not there yet.
That feels a little hard. Oh, you meant bust. Sorry. I didn't know which one.
Yes. You did not follow me there. Other people, I hope other people did.
You wouldn't believe what Brenna called Scoot Henderson on the Oregonian Sports podcast.
But I mean, at this point, I think all we could ask for is signs of life, and there's definitely been signs of life at the very least, so that's better than no signs of life. It's unfortunate that, a year and a half into his NBA tenure, that's what I'm having to say when there was so much hype around him coming out of the draft. Obviously, man, it's been a really rough year and a half, and some of that isn't all, his doing. Not really getting last year, I think, was kind of tough on him because I felt like it was kind of, and honestly, the start of this year too was a little bit like that, where it was like very, very touch and go, and not even from like a playing standpoint, but from like, he'd have to sit out for a few weeks because of an injury, and then he'd come back, and then he'd have to sit out again, and it was just like, oh my gosh, are you going to get more than a month playing? And especially playing competitive basketball, because, he had a decent end of the season last year, but what were the Blazers doing during that time? We all know the answer to that. So, I don't know. I guess I just don't have any grand revelations yet about anything. But I at least we're seeing something. I guess that's where we're at in the Scoot Henderson experience right now. Scoot Henderson, at least we're seeing something. That's all I can really say.
It's better than the alternative, right?
Yes.
Like, it's better than him going 0 for 10. And a single game is really, really, really hard to draw any, real conclusions about, like you said. I think it, is one of those things where it can be a little bit of a trap for fans because you see him shoot 8 for 10 and you're like, okay, so he should at least be a league average shooter. On the year, he's shooting 29% from 3. So he's not there yet. Some of the, there are people, I don't want to call them apologists, but Scoot Henderson advocates would point to the fact that his catch and shoot 3-point numbers have gotten better this year, that he is, he's shooting 35%, I think, on spot up threes, and he's, defending a little bit better. The question I have with Scoot still is, what is his advantage on a basketball court? Because it's
what is his thing?
It's not an ability to finish at the rim.
No.
When he drives, he ends up in trouble almost every time. And he was getting fouled last night. I mean, he shot 8 free throws against the Nets. He shot 12 free throws against the Mavericks in that loss on the road. So it's like, maybe some signs he's getting a little bit better at getting to the rim, or getting to the line. But like, you see him drive and defenses collapse on him and he has nowhere to go. And it's either a turnover, a wild shot, or he gets bailed out with a foul. And so, that's still a work in progress. His advantage is not his quickness. I mean, I think you'd say speed, but like that really is only helping you if you're able to finish at the rim. And it's not shooting. It just isn't. And
No.
and at this point, he is an NBA guard. He's one of the, let's say, 500 best basketball players in the world. Professional basketball players can get hot and have big games, and feel like the rim is the size of a the ocean, and so I think that was the kind of game that Scoot was having. You take it as a positive, of course, and like the fact that he has now had the experience of like seeing the rim that well and having that kind of night, like, can only help him. But by the way, what was funny? I saw this on House of Highlights, and I don't know if other people had it, but do you know when he scored his previous career high of 33 points? Did you see this?
I do not know.
It was January 14th, 2023.
Wow.
So it was his rookie year. On the same day, he scored his career high at the time of 33 points, which is now missing. Which was against Phoenix, in another loss.
A blessed day.
But in that game, I would also say it's like he shot the ball 31 times. So
yeah.
So I'm not. That game was I'd have to look at the full box score to see who played. I'm not going to go to those lengths at this exact moment, but that was a Scoot show game that I don't remember off the top of my head. But 33 points on 31 shots is not good. 39 points on 18 shots is good. So I think you'd have to say that offensively, Scoot had the best game of his career against the Nets. Like, sometimes those scoring numbers can be a little bit of can be a little misleading. Like, Scoot played a really good game against the Nets. It was fun to see. It was fun to see him get confident and knocking shots down. I mean, he was working in the mid range. Obviously, the three was falling. It was fun to see, but boy, does he still have a long way to go. And I was thrilled the Blazers drafted him. I thought that he was, going to be a game changer of a player for them to build around, if not, the piece, a piece. He certainly hasn't been that, and that's been, I think, a huge point of frustration for Blazer fans. And when you look at where the Blazers are and where they're going relative to at least where, I think fans would hope that they were going, I think that the biggest difference, the biggest separator, is Scoot Henderson not being a star. Because, the losing right now isn't that surprising. You're built around young teams. Your books aren't really lined up right. You have, Jeremy Grant, DeAndre Ayton still really out of place on this team. There's a lot of work to be done with the roster, but that's sort of to be expected. It's all okay when it's like, you have the next wave of talent and players in place. And with that pick, that's what the Blazers were supposed to get. That's what they thought they were getting. And they don't have it yet. And, he's still young. He can still be developed. I mean, there's still a lot of coaching left in his future. But, he's got almost 100 games into his career. And we're getting to the point where you can start making some conclusions. And of those almost 100 games, there have been a whole lot more that looked nothing like last night than offered even a hope that a night like last night was possible.
Yeah. I will add that Chauncey Billups did say post-game last night that Scoot was coming off potentially the best practice of his career the day before.
Love a good practice endorsement.
So I guess it's good that it translated. I don't know.
Again, it's better than the opposite.
Yes.
And listen, I mean, a string of good games has to start somewhere. So I think the challenge for Scoot Henderson now is, can you make not 39 points, not 80% from three?
No.
Everybody recognizes an outlier, but can you turn that into three really productive games? And you turn 3 into 8 productive games out of 10, and just start increasing your positive contributions to this team. Because and listen, Miami's a better team. Like I was at that game against Miami on Saturday, and Scoot was I want to say that he was like a team worst. Like, I'd have to find the full box score. At one point, I feel like he was a team worst minus 17. I'm not looking at the full box score right now, but he was not good in that game. So when you talk about a good week, yes, he was better at Dallas. He was better at New Orleans. He was then again, bad games are allowed when you're young, but he was a non-factor against the Heat. So, all things to continue to monitor. But Scoot Henderson, with the amount the Blazers have invested in him, and the amount of sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? There's sort of a
the fallout from the decision to invest in him.
Like an organizational equity that you've put into him, like your hopes and dreams, like your equity of ambition, maybe, into him. Like him paying off and panning out is so important, and it just looks like there hasn't been a lot of evidence of that happening. So it was nice to see a night where you're like, oh, he does look like a good basketball player. He does look like an NBA player, because a lot of this he hasn't. So, Brenna, we're gonna leave it there. We can go a little shorter. I mean, it's the quiet time. It's the quiet time of year. It's January. It's a good time. It's almost time for some spring cleaning around the house. Maybe throw out, go through the wardrobe, make some donations. What
are we doing here exactly?
We're ending this podcast so we can go do other things. Yeah.
Okay.
But I would like to thank you, as always, for the time. Are you going? I get the sense you're not going to Corvallis for the big Zags Beavs showdown.
No.
Okay.
No, actually, I have to sideline that day. So, nope, I will not be there
for the Pilots. You'll be on the sidelines.
Yes.
On the CW for the University of Portland basketball game.
Yes, but I will be on the sideline for the CW the next week for the Portland Gonzaga game. So
very, very cool.
So I get to do that one at least.
Listeners of this podcast will know to look for you there. Continue reading our coverage in the Oregonian. Brenna, of course, a fixture on Coin 6 and a fixture on this podcast, and always appreciated. Brenna, have a great weekend, and we'll talk soon.
Sounds good. Bye.